and then get the agent to run wild and have some security guarantees that it's not going to do more things than you kind of give it power to do. It's in an isolated environment, it's not going to write to your local file system, things like that. So we have a lot of customers deploying coding agents on that. We have customers deploying cloud coding environments on that. We have customers doing RL training on that for coding agents. So we're very well integrated into the kind of the coding agent world. I've actually been working on sandboxes for longer than the sort of sandbox category existed. Before Modal, I started a company called Jamsocket. I actually know Amal because Amal was one of our customers of that company. So it's really cool to come full circle and we be here. Jamsocket was acquired about a year ago by Modal, and we kind of became the sandbox team and have grown it out as the product group. One of the things, though, we're still a fairly lean team within Modal. Sandboxes as a product category kind of really took off, I'd say, late last year when these models got really good at kind of iterating long-term on coding tasks without needing human intervention. So once that happened, people were like, okay, we should run this overnight, and you don't want to necessarily have cloud code running on your laptop overnight. Why not just run that in the cloud and interact with it through Slack or things like that. So sandboxes as a product category have taken off. You could probably have seen every day on Hacker News there's a new sandbox product. It's become a very competitive landscape. We are one of the leaders, which is really exciting. But it also means that our small lean team, which has grown a bit, but we're dealing with a lot higher volume of customer requests, customers reporting potential issues. There's at scale, every code path in your server and in your client gets exercised a lot every day. And so it kind of creates this large volume of questions that we have to answer. We have to, if a customer gives us an issue, we have to determine if it was maybe they were holding it wrong. We increasingly actually get a lot of error reports that tend to be agents writing bad code, which is frustrating, but it happens. And so our strategy has kind of been, let's fight fire with fire. Let's see how much we can get agents to automate the sort of toil of, the first pass at an incident response, customer requests, just sort of generating reports for enterprise customers that want bespoke data analysis. And so I want to talk about how agents have gotten really good at doing that stuff. Because I know a lot of people who are power users of agents for writing code who don't necessarily turn agents to their data reporting problems, or even incident analysis problems. So a couple examples of these tasks to make it a little bit more concrete. A customer encountered this error, paste the error, find the root cause. Create a markdown report on CPU reservations versus actual utilization for an application deployed on Modal. Write a script to collect, this is actually one I did yesterday, a script to collect all IPs assigned to our entire fleet from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. yesterday. And this is one that I think is really underused but is really cool, is just getting agents to go back in time in a repo and kind of identify the actual change that caused a regression. These are also things that a year ago I would not have trusted an agent to do, and so I think there's just a lot of a part of the process of working with agents is retrying the things that didn't work 2 months ago and seeing if they work now. So the architecture that makes this all work. So when I'm doing this, I'm using Claude Code, Codex. I'm using generally just a local agent, off the shelf kind of CLI, but that I've put some tools into. And so those tools give it the context that it needs. So Datadog has an off-the-shelf MCP server. ClickHouse Cloud has an off-the-shelf MCP server. Obviously, the coding agents can explore the code base and know how to use the Git CLI to get to check out different revisions of that, as well as the GitHub CLI to kind of get commit detail, pull request information, things like that. But the big piece here is actually this data view MCP. So this was something that I wrote for my own use. Actually, Claude wrote for my own use. But, we have like an ORM view of the data in our code base. So I wanted to expose like a read-only view of the data, in which the ORM kind of can access multiple data sources. So instead of trying to have like Claude write SQL and then run that against the database, which for one thing, like even if I only hit a read replica, there's still sort of like, it's still a production data server, so like what if it locks, what if it, I don't know. You don't want a slow running query to like break anything, so the fact that this is sort of like, it creates some guardrails basically for the agent to, first of all, like know what query to issue without thinking too hard about it, but then make sure that it's always issuing the right types of queries. So yeah, the data sources here, so there's like some off-the-shelf MCP servers, there's custom MCP server, it's not writing raw SQL, and then the code base and get CLI. And then the other thing that I do a little bit differently, or that I've sort of iterated on here, is like prompting. I tend not to write these prompts like directly in the Claude CLI. What I'll do is sort of start a markdown document, start writing my prompt, start pasting in, maybe I paste in some logs, I might paste in the actual customer complaint or the request, things like that. And so I find just sort of doing this in an editor allows me to iterate, not worry about hitting enter too fast and having it go off to the races. And so yeah, I include things like error logs. I'll also tend to hint at like the steps that I would take. So like, look up this, first of all, identify the sequence from the code base that you would expect to happen here, and what log messages you would expect to be logged, and then check Datadog. Or maybe start with Datadog, find when these log messages started, and then look at the Git history to see if there's a recent commit that might have affected that. The other thing is, these are coding agents. They are really good at writing code. I think a lot of times people think of that in terms of like they're good at writing production code, but code is really cheap now. And so you can get them to write code even if they only is run once. So I'll often get agents to write scripts as a Python file and say run it, and then I'll just delete the Python file after. But if I want to, it creates this artifact that I can check, which is something else I'll talk about. So this other thing that I think is really important here is producing artifacts along the way. So one example of that is writing reports to Markdown. So instead of kind of just getting the response inline in the CLI and kind of screenshotting that or copy pasting that, I'll say like write this to a report. And the advantage to that is that often it's not, I'll have follow-up questions, and so I'll get it to change how it did the analysis or add to the analysis, and it's kind of iterating on the results file as it does this. And I just find that it helps it keep the context, and it helps certainly it also produces something that is easier then for me to look over than having to go back to the conversation history and see, okay, here were the initial results, and then I had to pull this additional data and things like that. So I'll say like, okay, produce a markdown file with a table, add this column to that table, things like that. The other thing about these results, markdown files, is I'll say, include the queries that you're running in there. And so it sort of shows its work. And then if I want to, I can say, turn this results MD file into a Python script that I can run to recreate this report, maybe with different inputs. Describe specifically what you want here. So like if you're looking for like a root cause or like raw code, you want like code samples, tables, include queries that you run is a good one. And I'd say the general rule here is like this should contain enough information that as a sort of standalone artifact, you can verify that it is true by reissuing the queries, kind of going to the source data and validating. Because the worst thing is if it hallucinated something and you don't verify that and make assumptions, because as I'll talk about it as well, like hallucinations are a real problem here. And then so like artifacts like a script, like a Python script. So This is, again, a way for you to kind of get an artifact that you can validate by skimming over it and making sure that it is sort of doing things in a reasonable way. So yeah, red herrings and hallucinations. One of the problems with this, especially at the scale of something like modal, like we have a gigantic log volume, as you can imagine. And at a large enough volume, you can find log messages to validate pretty much any hypothesis. So what you don't want is, like TCP connections will fail all the time, right? Like you'll get like on the worldwide internet, like external, like not peered clouds, but like clients talking to your server, there will be TCP connection failures. And if you're logging those at any volume, that looks like an error that an agent could pick up on and say, hey, this is like, look, this is your problem. TCP connections are failing. And like, no, TCP connections will fail. And there's a ton of things like that, right? There's like RPCs have weird things happen. There's you lose connection to a database if you've got a multi-cloud setup. Like things like that happen. They're not always part of the problem. So one of the things that I like to do is like kind of challenge the agent to like justify the theory. Like, can you demonstrate? What was the source data for this? When did this start? Does this timing line up? Does the root cause that you're suggesting? Do you have evidence that that lines up with the kind of timing of the symptom that I presented to you? And I find that along the way, like I'll often iterate over like 3 or 4 theories that the agent has, and it's with this very like, oh, you're absolutely right kind of like interactions, right? It's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. So you can't outsource all your thinking to this. You do need to kind of push it. But the nice thing about like an agent is you can kind of be very critical of it and like challenge its theories, and it doesn't burn out. So that is a nice aspect. Yeah, I guess that's the end of the presentation. I do want to mention that we're hiring for a lot of roles at Modal. So if this stuff interests you, definitely reach out. I've got my contact information, I think, on the next slide. Cool.
All right, so I actually forgot to mention, but we are going to be doing 5-minute Q&As after all the presentations. Now, I should have said that earlier because I'm sure that some people were like, "Oh man, I would love to ask Paul some questions." But just to get us started, and by the way, afterwards, like if you do have a question for Paul, please raise your hand and I'll come by and give you a mic. Paul, I got a question for you. So you talk a lot about like, okay, we can automate some of the incidents reporting. We can make it so that you have a bug report come in and then Claude can just automatically kick off a session and figure something out. Where does the person end up living? Right? Like you end up talking a little bit about this with the red herring part of this, but I'm very curious, like especially as models get better, where do you see the person end up living in all of this?
Yeah, so I think as models get better, the person is less and less important, but I think today the person is still very important to drive this. There are products that sort of automate this end to end, and we do like we've gotten into the habit of kind of just like kicking off a cloud agent session just to like see what it comes up with. But I would say generally that is still, for incident reporting, like that will still kind of point us to a wrong root cause 75% of the time. And that's where like being in the loop, like challenging the agent to come up with evidence, challenging that evidence, like you're still very actively, like this is not a cop-out, like you're not getting away from like being involved in this analysis. You do still have to kind of be on top of it. The same way that with coding agents a few years ago, you still had to kind of be in the loop on every change, and then over time we've kind of gotten more trusting of it. I think the same thing's sort of happening here, but we're still like a little bit further back on the curve when it comes to this, because it's just such a huge search space that the agent has of the logs, the Git history. Like you do need to point it a little bit in the right direction.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah.
Hi, Paul. Great talk. Thanks. So you talked a lot about these problems of interacting with the agents, right? You see now Party keeps talking about agentic engineering. right? And no matter how much, at least I do a lot of what you described there, right? But no matter how much we do, I even built my own agentic engineering plugin, out of superpowers and all of that stuff, right? The interaction is really intense. The agent keeps making architectural mistakes, and you can't think of every single, item ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then that interaction goes on and on and on until you get to something you really want in the end.
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is if that you have found the secret sauce to optimize this process, because it can be really, really frustrating.
One thing that I have noticed is that when it comes to kind of like root cause analysis, there's like code-based organization tends to matter a lot, and so I've noticed that it's like, for example, there's some pieces of the code that have been rewritten in a different language for performance. That gets very confusing for it because both code paths still exist, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not able to trace through our Nginx and Kubernetes and all of the sources of truth that it would need to actually map an RPC to the actual code base that's running it. It has to go through, grep basically, and it sees like, okay, well, there's a Go RPC handler and there's a Python RPC handler. I'm just going to guess that this one is the one handling the message. So I think there can be a lot of things in the code base that can tend to confuse it for that. Same with like the Datadog log quality. I think there's like times when I've noticed the red herrings are probably the result of poorly worded log messages. So I think some of it is sort of iterating when it falls into these traps and kind of figuring out like why it fell into that trap and if there's something you can do there. I think that as we as an organization are using coding agents a lot, I think that we're finding the traps that agents fall into, but also agents are writing code that agents understand better. And so I think those two things have led it to actually, even compared to 3 months ago, it feels to me like between that and the models improving, it's been like a night and day shift for the quality of results I get from this type of thing.
Hey, Bob. My voice is when you are stress testing an agent, how do you ensure that it's not leading to or is there an evaluation framework you can use to move these things?
Yeah, and I think so. The question was like, how when you're kind of being critical of the agent results, like how do you know it's not lying to you? I think the one thing there is like I just try to get to the root data. Like show me the query, show me the results of the query. Like really. And if you really don't trust it, you can run the query yourself. Although I find like when it comes to these very factual things, the agents don't usually lie. It's like the hallucinations usually happen in the higher order thinking than the lower level, like this is true, this is false kind of thinking. So yeah, I just kind of like try to get to the source as quickly as I can. And make sure that it makes sense. Like I think that's the other thing is like if there's sort of disparities where it's like, I think this commit changed it. Well, when did that commit happen? And it'll often realize its mistake and be like, oh, well, that was a week ago. The issues started on Tuesday, so like, they're probably unrelated. Like, I find that kind of loop often happens where it's not like it's trying to lie to you, but it will fall into these hallucinations and just needs to be like snapped out of it.
All right, thank you so much, Paul.